If you relate to this, something changed. You felt that twitch in your stomach the moment those words hit, didn't you? Like someone reached through your ribs and flicked the part of you that still reacts. The part you pretend is dead because reacting is embarrassing, because needing anything is embarrassing. Because if you admit you're thirsty, then everybody gets to watch you crawl toward a cup that might get yanked away for fun. Oh, you hate that laugh. You hate any laugh that sounds like it already knows the ending. And you've been living like the ending already happened. Like your best years got pawned off for rent money and excuses. Like you're just walking around in a borrowed body doing tasks so nobody can accuse you of failing. Look at you. You became so reasonable, so mature, so good at swallowing words until they rot inside your throat and come out later as headaches, as tight shoulders, as that weird hollow stare you catch in mirrors when you think nobody's watching. You call it being calm. You call it being patient. You call it being strong. But I can see the way you flinch when someone says your name with a tone that sounds like they're about to leave. I can see the way you answer texts too fast, like you're trying to prove you exist before the other person forgets you. I can see how you listen to footsteps in a hallway, how your heart starts bargaining with silence. You've been training yourself to accept scraps, and you dressed it up like humility. You've been letting people step into your life like it's a waiting room, sit down, complain, take what they came for, then stand up and walk out without even putting the chair back. And you smile. Because your smile is a lock. Because if you stop smiling, somebody might see what's behind the door. And behind the door, there's a kid in there who learned too early that love can be late, can be conditional, can be withheld like a punishment, can be given with one hand while the other hand points out your flaws so you don't get too proud. You're tired of carrying that kid, but you're even more tired of admitting the kid exists, because then you'd have to admit you were hurt. And if you were hurt, then it means the ones who did it mattered to you, and you can't stand that. So you pretend it didn't matter. You rewrite history into something manageable. You say, it's fine. You say, I'm used to it. You say, that's just how people are. You say a lot of clever little things to keep your dignity. But you know what you never say? You never say, I deserved better. You never say, I needed help. You never say, that broke something in me. Because those sentences feel like kneeling, and you're terrified of kneeling in front of anyone again, even in front of yourself. So you keep standing, rigid, polite, useful, like a soldier guarding an empty house. And you wonder why you feel so cold. Here's the joke. You've been trying so hard not to be a burden that you became a ghost. Not to them, not to the world, to yourself. You left the room without leaving the room. You went through the motions and called it progress. You built a whole personality out of not needing. You became the person who never asks, never demands, never makes it awkward, never says, hey, that hurt, until your insides started speaking for you in their own ugly language. You don't even notice how many times you apologize for things that aren't your fault. You don't notice how you shrink your opinions into something that fits other people's comfort. You don't notice how you say maybe when you mean no, how you say it's okay when your stomach is screaming it's not, how you say whatever you want, like your wants are childish toys you're embarrassed to play with. You think you're being kind. No, You're being afraid. Afraid that if you take up space, they'll finally give you what you've been expecting your whole life. That look. The look that says, you're too much. The look that says, who do you think you are? The look that says, we liked you better when you were easy. And so you trained yourself to be easy. You ironed your edges flat. You sanded down your needs. You swallowed your anger because anger is messy, and you promised yourself you'd never be messy again after the last time someone used your mess against you. Let me guess. You've been betrayed in a way that didn't leave bruises. The kind of betrayal that leaves you doubting your own memory. The kind where the person smiles while they do it, where they call you sensitive, where they say you're overthinking, where they rewrite what happened right in front of your face and then act offended that you noticed. Or maybe it was quieter. They just stopped showing up. No explanation, no goodbye, just a slow fade like you were a song they got bored of. And you kept replaying your last conversations like security footage, hunting for the frame where you became disposable. You told yourself it was your fault. Of course you did. Because blaming yourself feels like control. If it's your fault, then you can fix it. If it's your fault, then you're not at the mercy of random cruelty. If it's your fault, then the world makes sense. So you carry guilt like a lucky coin, rubbing it whenever you feel panic. It doesn't protect you. It just keeps your hands busy so you don't reach for the truth. And the truth is uglier and simpler. Some people take, and some people leave. And sometimes, you were just standing too close when their hunger showed up. That's it. No grand cosmic meaning. No secret lesson wrapped in a pretty bow. Just a human being choosing themselves, and you paying the price because you were available. And you hate that answer, because it means you can do everything right and still get hurt. Welcome to the part of the room you've been avoiding. There's no perfect performance that buys you safety. There's no flawless behavior that guarantees loyalty. There's no amount of being good that turns a careless person into a careful one. You learn to be excellent to earn what should have been basic. You learn to over-deliver because you were raised on crumbs. And now, even when someone offers you something real, you don't know how to hold it without squeezing too hard or dropping it out of disbelief. You're always bracing, always scanning, always waiting for the shift in temperature that means the kindness is about to be charged back with interest. And because you're always bracing, you're exhausted. You wake up tired. You go to sleep tired. You sit in rooms full of people and still feel like you're behind glass. You laugh at jokes a half-second late because your mind is somewhere else, conducting trials for mistakes you haven't made yet. You keep thinking you're behind. Behind in life, behind in success, behind in relationships, behind in healing. You hate seeing other people move smoothly through the world like they were given an instruction manual you never got. You stare at your own hands sometimes and wonder why they don't feel like yours. And you tell yourself, quietly, that you're broken. Not damaged, not hurt, broken. Like something that can't be repaired. Because broken has an ending. Broken lets you stop trying. Broken means you don't have to risk hope again. Broken means you don't have to climb back into the ring and get laughed at when you fall. But you're not broken. You're trained. You're conditioned. You're a living record of what you survived. And you keep confusing survival habits for your identity. That's why you can't breathe. That's why you keep checking the same old wounds like a tongue poking a sore tooth. That's why you're reading into every pause, every delayed reply, every changed tone. Your nervous system has been living like the next hit is coming, and you've been calling it intuition. Listen to me. That thing you call intuition, half the time, is just an old fear wearing a wise mask. You learned patterns, sure. You learned what neglect looks like. You learned what manipulation sounds like. You learned what contempt feels like. Your senses got sharp because they had to. But you also learned to expect pain as a default. And you keep paying for expectations before anything even happens. You pre-grieve. You pre-apologize. You pre-lose. You sabotage small joys because you don't trust them. You hold back words because you don't trust yourself. You act distant because you don't trust anyone else. And then, when the distance becomes real, you act surprised, as if you didn't build it brick by brick with your own hands. I'm not saying you caused what happened to you. I'm saying you're the one still maintaining the damage. There's a difference. The first is cruelty. The second is a habit. And habits can be broken, but not by being nice to them. Not by tiptoeing around them and calling them trauma like it's a pet name. Habits get broken by truth, by structure, by refusal, by discipline. Not the kind you post about, the kind nobody claps for, the kind you do when the room is quiet and your excuses get loud. Because your excuses are loud, aren't they? They sound like logic. They sound like humility. They sound like realism. They sound like, I'm just not that person. They sound like, it's too late. They sound like, this is how I am. No, this is how you became. And if you became this, you can unbecome parts of it. But it will cost you something you've been guarding like a treasure. Your story. You love your story. You hate it, but you love it. Because it explains you. Because it makes you special. Because it makes you tragically understandable. Because it gives you a reason to stay stuck while still feeling intelligent about it. You've been carrying your pain like an identity card. You show it to yourself when you want to justify not moving. See, you say? This is why I can't trust. This is why I don't try. This is why I keep my heart locked. This is why I don't aim high. And it works. It works so well that you don't even realize you're using it. You just feel tired and call it fate. You just feel afraid and call it wisdom. You just feel alone and call it independence. You're not independent. You're isolated with a clean label. And you know it, because when the night gets quiet, when the phone stops glowing, when the noise in your head calms down for a second, what shows up? That ache. That slow ache, like an empty chair at a table. The chair nobody sits in, but you keep it there anyway, because removing it would mean admitting they're not coming. You've had a lot of empty chairs, haven't you? People who promised, people who meant it in the moment, people who were sincere until being sincere cost them something. And every time they left, you told yourself you should have seen it. You told yourself you're foolish. You told yourself you're too trusting, or too needy, or too intense, or too quiet, or too whatever makes the math work. You made yourself the problem, because it's easier than accepting the truth. You were unlucky enough to love people who weren't built to carry love responsibly. And you're still punishing yourself for their lack. That's what I'm here for. Not to comfort you. Comfort is cheap. Comfort is what you've been feeding yourself to avoid the surgery. I'm here to cut. I'm here to open the ribs and point at the organs and say, that's where it started. I'm here to stare at you until you stop hiding behind that polite expression that says, you're fine, you're okay, you're grateful, you're strong. You're not okay. You're functioning. Big difference. And you don't want to be just functioning anymore. That's why you're listening. That's why your chest feels tight. That's why part of you wants to run and part of you wants to stay. Because you're tired of being your own hostage. You remember the first time you learned silence could be weaponized against you? Not the dramatic silence with yelling before it, not the kind that makes movies. The ordinary, everyday silence that turns you into a question mark. Somebody important to you went quiet when you needed them most. Maybe they were angry and wouldn't say why. Maybe they were busy and forgot you existed for days. Maybe they were right there in the same house, but their attention had a wall around it and you kept bouncing off. You learned to read the air. You learned to read the clink of a dish, the close of a door, the way footsteps sounded heavier. You learned to become small to survive big moods. You learned to predict storms. You learned to offer peace like a sacrifice. And you learned something worse. You learned that your feelings weren't safe, that expressing them could get you mocked, dismissed, punished, or ignored. So you started treating your feelings like contraband. You smuggled them into the dark. You hid them behind jokes, behind achievements, behind politeness, behind being the one who understands. You became the translator for everybody else's pain, didn't you? The one who listens, the one who stays up late talking people down, the one who answers, the one who gives advice so sharp and compassionate it could save strangers. And then you sit alone and can't apply a single sentence to yourself. Because when it's you, you don't feel compassion. You feel disgust. You look at your own hurt and you call it weakness. You look at your own needs and you call them shameful. You look at your own tears and you call them dramatic, even when nobody sees them. That's the wound. Not that you were hurt, that you were taught to hate yourself for being hurt. That's the poison. And you've been drinking it for years, pretending it's medicine. You stare at your past like it's a courtroom, and you're the defendant and the prosecutor at the same time. You bring up evidence. You interrogate yourself. You say, why didn't you speak up? You say, why did you stay? You say, why did you trust? You say, why are you like this? And you never, ever cross-examine the people who taught you to live that way. You never put them under the light. You keep them blurred. Like a photograph, you refuse to focus because the details would make you furious. You're afraid of your fury. You're afraid of what you do with it. So you bury it under understanding. You tell yourself they had reasons. You tell yourself they were hurt too. You tell yourself everyone is doing their best. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's a soothing lie. You use empathy as a muzzle. You use forgiveness as a cage. You keep letting people off the hook because you don't want to become hard, and you think the only options are soft and stupid or hard and cruel. That's a childish choice. You're not a child anymore. You can be kind and still be dangerous to disrespect. You can be patient and still have boundaries that don't negotiate. You can be gentle and still walk away without a speech when someone shows you what they are. But to do that, you have to accept something you've been avoiding. Your life is yours to govern, not theirs, not your family's, not your friends, not the people who come and go. Yours. And governance means rules. Governance means consequences. Governance means the ability to stand in discomfort without running back to what's familiar. And you are addicted to familiar pain. Familiar pain is predictable. Familiar pain has a script. Familiar pain lets you say, "See, I knew it." It feels like being right. New health feels like being lost. New health feels like not knowing how to act. New health feels like not needing to perform. And that terrifies you, because you don't know who you are without performance. Let's pull that thread. Performance. You've been performing your worth for so long that you forgot worth is not a performance. You became a worker in your own life, clocking in to earn permission to exist. You over-explain so people don't assume the worst. You over-give so people don't leave. You overthink so you don't get surprised. And you still get surprised. That's the funniest part. You do all this mental gymnastics. You plan 10 steps ahead. You rehearse conversations in your head like a lawyer preparing a case. And then life does what it always does. It hits from an angle you didn't practice for. And then you blame yourself for not practicing harder. You're tired because you're trying to control the uncontrollable. Control is your religion, your comfort blanket, your addiction. You keep thinking if you can just understand enough, analyze enough, predict enough, then you'll finally be safe. But safety is not something the world gives you. Safety is something you build inside you. The ability to handle what comes without collapsing into your old patterns. That's the game. Not avoiding pain, handling it. Not preventing loss, enduring it. Not guaranteeing loyalty, becoming the kind of person who doesn't beg for it. You've begged in ways you don't even recognize as begging. You've begged with silence, hoping they'd notice. You've begged with effort, hoping they'd appreciate. You've begged with loyalty, hoping they'd match it. You've begged with self-erasure, hoping you'd become easier to keep. And every time you begged, you hated yourself a little more. That self-hate built up like soot. Now it's on everything. It's why compliments slide off you like rain off glass. It's why you don't believe good things people say, but you believe every insult you imagine. It's why you can remember a mistake from years ago like it happened yesterday, but you can't remember a victory without immediately minimizing it. You don't celebrate yourself, you audit yourself. You don't rest, you collapse. You don't set goals, you set traps. Because if the goal is impossible, then failing is inevitable. And if failing is inevitable, then you don't have to risk the embarrassment of hoping. You built a life where disappointment feels familiar, so you don't get blindsided by it. That's not strength. That's fear with a schedule. And it's been stealing from you while you call it being responsible. You know exactly where the theft shows. In the way you stop yourself from speaking when you're about to say something real. In the way you keep friendships at a level where they can't injure you too deeply. In the way you do not ask anyone to meet you emotionally because you're scared they'll look at you like you're inconvenient. In the way you turn your own dreams into jokes so nobody can laugh first. In the way you scroll and scroll and scroll, letting other people's lives pass through your eyes because watching feels safer than living. And then, at night, you feel that ache again. That ache that's not even sadness anymore. It's grief. Grief for the version of you that could have existed if you had been protected instead of tested. Grief for the days you lost to anxiety. Grief for the times you were right about someone hurting you and you stayed anyway because leaving felt like admitting you weren't lovable enough to make them change. You thought your love could fix them. You thought your patience could teach them. You thought your sacrifice could prove something. Sacrifice only proves one thing. You are willing to bleed to keep someone else comfortable. It does not make them value you. It makes them used to you bleeding. That's a law, not a metaphor, a law. People adapt to what you tolerate. And you have tolerated too much because you were trained to see endurance as love. Endurance is not love. Endurance is survival. Love is choice plus responsibility. Love is respect plus consistency. Love does not require you to disappear. If your presence is a problem, you are in the wrong room. But you keep walking into wrong rooms because they feel familiar. Because right rooms feel too bright. Because in a right room, your excuses don't have anywhere to hide. In a right room, you can't say, "They made me." In a right room, you have to face the fact that you are the one making decisions now. And that's terrifying when you don't trust yourself. Do you trust yourself? Really? Not your opinions, not your intelligence. Do you trust yourself to protect you? To choose well? To walk away when it's time? To say no without writing an essay? To accept solitude without crawling back to disrespect just to feel chosen? You don't. That's why you keep replaying old pains. Old pain is a place you know. New self-respect is a place you haven't built yet. So let's build it. Not with motivational speeches, with an autopsy report. Your wound is not that you were abandoned. It's that you internalized abandonment as a verdict about your worth. Your wound is not that you were humiliated. It's that you started living as if humiliation is always around the corner, and you pre-shrunk your soul to avoid it. Your wound is not that you were betrayed. It's that you started believing betrayal is inevitable, and you stopped investing fully anywhere, so even when good people show up, they only get half of you, and then you complain that nobody knows you. They can't know you if you keep hiding the parts you think are unlovable. And you think those parts are unlovable because you were taught that your needs are annoying, your sensitivity is a flaw, your boundaries are selfish, your anger is dangerous, your sadness is inconvenient. Whoever taught you that did not have to hate you to harm you. They just had to be unskilled, unaware, selfish, lost in their own storms. But you're not a child anymore. You don't have to keep paying rent to an old lesson just because you learned it early. Here's another ugly truth. You get something out of staying wounded. Not consciously, not because you enjoy suffering, because the wound gives you an alibi. If you're wounded, then you don't have to risk being fully seen. If you're wounded, then you can say, I'm working on it, forever, without ever stepping into the arena where you might actually get rejected as your current self. Woundedness becomes a shield, and it's a good shield. It keeps out woundedness becomes a shield, and it's a good shield. It keeps out danger. It also keeps out love. It keeps out growth. It keeps out the kind of life that would require you to show up imperfectly and still stand tall. You keep waiting to be healed before you live. You keep waiting to be confident before you act. You keep waiting to be ready before you start. That's a trap. Readiness is not a feeling, it's a decision. Confidence is not a gift, it's a byproduct. You don't get it first. You earn it by doing what you said you would do, especially when you don't feel like it. Discipline is not punishment. Discipline is protection. Discipline is the guard at the gate of your mind saying, we don't let every thought walk in and set up a camp. Because your mind has been letting thoughts squat there for years. Thoughts like, you're behind. Thoughts like, you're not enough. Thoughts like, you always mess it up. Thoughts like, people leave. Thoughts like, don't try. And you believe them because they're familiar, not because they're true. Familiarity is a drug. Your brain confuses familiar with safe. That's why you keep returning to the same emotional neighborhoods, even if they're dangerous. So you need a new kind of safety, the safety of standards. Standards for how you speak to yourself, standards for what you tolerate, standards for who gets access to you, standards for what you do when you're scared. Because right now, when you're scared, you disappear, you freeze, you procrastinate, you numb. You talk yourself out of action by calling it being thoughtful. You call it taking time. You call it processing. Sometimes it is. Most of the time, it's avoidance wearing a lab coat. And you know it because after you process, you feel smaller, not clearer. You feel heavier, not wiser. You feel like you lost a fight you never showed up to. That's the pattern. You keep losing fights in your head, and then you walk into your day bruised by imaginary punches. I want you to notice something. You are alive. You are here. You made it through nights you swore would swallow you. You made it through mornings where the air felt too thick. You made it through betrayals, humiliations, failures, rejections, and you are still standing. Not because you were lucky, because there is something stubborn in you, something that refused to end. You don't call it strength, you call it stubbornness, or numbness, or habit, but it's strength. And it's been wasted on endurance without direction. You've been enduring the wrong things. You've been enduring disrespect, enduring uncertainty, enduring your own neglect of yourself. And now it's time to redirect that endurance. Because endurance is a weapon, not against the world, against the part of you that keeps surrendering, against the part of you that keeps making deals with fear. You know what fear does? It negotiates. It says, just don't do it today. It says, just don't speak up this time. It says, just wait until you feel better. It says, just keep the peace. And every time you accept the deal, fear gets bigger. It charges interest. It becomes a landlord. It starts telling you what rooms you're allowed to enter in your own life. And you obey because you want relief. You want the anxiety to stop. So you obey, and the anxiety grows anyway. Because anxiety doesn't want peace. It wants control. And it will never be satisfied. You starve it by acting anyway, by speaking anyway, by choosing anyway, by being seen anyway, by failing anyway, by getting up anyway. You want a life where you feel safe all the time? That's a fantasy. What you want is a life where you trust yourself to handle what comes. That's real. That's buildable. That's earned. And it starts with one brutal sentence you've been avoiding. Nobody is coming to save you from the consequences of your own avoidance. Nobody. They can support you. They can love you. They can help you. But they cannot live your life for you. They cannot make your choices. They cannot rescue you from the hours you waste hiding. You have to meet yourself. You have to become the kind of person who does not abandon you, because you've been abandoning you for years in small ways. Every time you knew the truth and swallowed it. Every time you needed rest and forced yourself to keep going to prove something. Every time you needed to say no and said yes to avoid conflict. Every time you felt something and told yourself you weren't allowed. Those are abandonments. They add up. They teach your heart that you cannot be trusted. And then you wonder why you feel alone even when you're with people. You're alone because you left yourself. So come back. Not with tenderness first, with honesty. Honesty that stings. Honesty that sobers. Honesty that says, I have been complicit in my own shrinking. Honesty that says, I have been waiting for permission. Honesty that says, I have been calling fear wisdom. Honesty that says, I have been trading my future for temporary comfort. Do you want the worst part? The worst part is you already know. You've known. There were moments, small, sharp moments, when you saw yourself from above, when you watched yourself accept less than you deserved, when you watched yourself laugh at a joke that hurt you, when you watched yourself chase someone who didn't choose you back, when you watched yourself procrastinate on the thing that could change your life, and you felt disgust. Not at them, at you. Because you knew you were betraying you. And you promised yourself quietly, never again. And then you did it again. That's why you can't look at yourself sometimes. That's why you avoid stillness. Stillness is a mirror, and you don't like what you see, Because it's not that you're weak, it's that you're strong in the wrong direction. You're disciplined about panic. You're consistent about self-criticism. You're loyal to doubt. You show up for fear every day like it pays your bills. Imagine if you showed up for yourself with that same consistency. Imagine if you treated your mind like a place you're responsible for, not a place you rent to thoughts that hate you. Imagine if you treated your time like something sacred, not something to be poured into distractions until the day is gone and you can hate yourself properly at night. Imagine if you stopped performing strength and started practicing it. Strength is not keeping a straight face while your insides scream. Strength is not staying silent to keep other people comfortable. Strength is not being the person who never needs anything. Strength is doing the hard thing on purpose, telling the truth, setting the boundary, leaving the room, doing the work, accepting the loneliness that comes when you stop being convenient. Because yes, when you stop being convenient, some people will leave. Let them. Let them reveal what they were there for. Your job is not to keep everybody. Your job is to keep your integrity. Your job is to keep your sanity. Your job is to keep your life moving in the direction that makes you respect yourself when the lights are off. That's what changed. If you relate to this, something changed. You're done being a volunteer in your own suffering. You're done being a nice hostage. You're done narrating your pain like a story you can't edit. You're about to become the editor. And editors cut. They cut scenes that don't serve the story. They cut characters that drain the plot. They cut habits that weaken the main character. They cut lies. They cut fantasies. They cut the part where the hero waits for someone to notice. They cut the part where the hero keeps returning to the same burning building, hoping it will be different this time. You're going to cut. Not people out of spite, not out of vengeance, out of clarity, out of self-respect, out of obedience to reality. Reality says you cannot heal in the same environment that keeps injuring you. Reality says you cannot build a future while worshiping your past. Reality says you cannot become disciplined while feeding every impulse that begs for relief. Reality says you cannot find peace while you keep making deals with fear. So the autopsy is simple. The cause of your suffering is not one event. It is a pattern. And patterns can be broken. But they don't break themselves. You break them. And it will hurt. Not because you're failing, because you're growing. Because you're finally letting the old version of you die. Not you, never you. Just the old version that survived by shrinking. That version has earned rest. That version did what it had to do, but it's not driving anymore. You are. And that means you don't get to keep pretending this is just a mood that visits you and leaves when it's bored. You don't get to keep calling it a phase, like your whole life hasn't been shaped around it. You don't get to keep treating your own mind like a landlord you tiptoe around, paying rent in anxiety just so it doesn't evict you from peace. You think the moment you decide to change, you're supposed to feel brave. That's adorable. Real change feels like grief at first. It feels like standing at the edge of a familiar cliff and realizing you've been calling the drop home because it's what you know. It feels like losing a friend, except the friend is the old version of you that kept you alive when you didn't know how to live. So let's do the part you hate. Let's honor that version without letting it rule you. That version of you was built in emergency, built in the tight hallway between someone's disappointment and your need to be accepted. Built in the pause before a door slammed. Built in those moments where you learned the safest thing was to become invisible, agreeable, impressive,